India, a country whose history and culture have so dazzled the rest of the world that they have often blinded us to the equally fascinating reality of its wildlife. Yet no other Asian country can boast so many different species, such varied ecosystems. In this, as in so much else, India is more a continent than a country. This is a different India from the one we normally see, the India of the wild. Hindu and Buddhist gods were reincarnated as animals. The forests became living temples. No other country has created such direct links between religion and nature, between man and the living creatures around him. Many animals became sacred. At that time, the jungle was the great mother giver of life, on which man depended. Even the dangerous animals were objects of admiration and reverence. But in time, this was to change. Uncontrolled population growth has made the inhabitants of India forget their past and their close relationship with nature. The wild India is disappearing, and with it, its most emblematic and fascinating representative, the tiger. No other animal has played such a major role in the history of the different peoples of this country, and no other animal has been so admired. Today, the tiger is disappearing, symptomatic of what is happening to the natural environment of India. And its strength, cunning, and beauty, qualities once revered by the peoples of Asia, have now become the sword of Damocles hanging over the head of this, the most beautiful cat in the world. At one time, the tiger ruled over all of India. No other predator threatened them, and vast, unbroken expanses of jungle covered the country from north to south. The arrival of man at first hardly changed the situation, but with the invention of firearms, the great striped cat was suddenly vulnerable, and human settlements began to encroach on what up to then had been virgin jungle. From the very start, the relationship between man and tiger was one of competition. These were the two great predators who tested their strength against each other. As the jungle was cleared, the animals on which the tiger feeds began to disappear. So they attacked the cattle and, inevitably, on occasions, the men who defended their herds. Later, the strength and the cunning of the tigers made them the trophy most sought after by hunters. For the Maharajas and the English of colonial India, the tiger represented the supreme example of the wild, untamed Asia, the nature they wished to subdue and control. And they were absolutely right, for the tiger is the final link in the complex food chain of the Indian jungle, the most sophisticated link, and so the most dependent on all the others. As a result, the presence of tigers has become the best indication of the state of conservation of the ecosystem in which they live. In short, the plight of the tiger is the plight of all wildlife in India, of this entire rich, varied, and virtually unknown world. For the tiger, all the ecosystems of India are potential habitats. All they need is abundant vegetation, water, and sufficient prey on which to feed. Water, vegetation, and food are the three pillars which support the wildlife of India. All three are absolutely vital, and each one dependent on the others. Without water, there is no vegetation. and without vegetation the land does not retain water. Without plants, the herbivores will not survive, and without herbivores there are no predators. Equally, without predators, herbivores grow to such numbers they exhaust the natural resources and so eventually die out. Being part of this complex mechanism means you need to be constantly on the alert. For the herbivores, tigers are just one of the many predators of the jungle, and any movement among the shadows makes them suspicious. A Gaur has detected a group of dholes, Indian wild dogs. A single dhole is not especially dangerous, but their strength lies in numbers. Their social structure makes them formidable hunters, and even the tigers respect them and avoid them. The needs of the hunters vary according to their size. The dholes weigh barely 20 kilos, and though they hunt in packs and share the kill among all the family, they require relatively little in terms of prey per year, and this means they can colonize territories where others would not survive. The bigger the animal, the greater the amount of food it needs, and so the choice of habitat is more limited. In India, the largest hunters are precisely the cats, and in a country where deforestation has reached alarming levels, these large cats are the first to suffer the consequences. The leopard has suffered comparatively little. It is not too big, and its nocturnal, solitary habits have permitted it to colonize all types of habitat. Thus, though they are rare, leopards can be found throughout the subcontinent, from Sri Lanka right up to the frozen plateau of the Himalayas, where their place is taken by the snow panther. But for larger cats, things are more complicated. The Asiatic lion has not been so lucky. It once lived throughout Asia Minor from Turkey to India, but today there are barely 300 survivors living in the semi-arid region of Gujarat. This powerful feline might have colonized the jungles which still remain in the center and south of the country, and where there is still sufficient natural prey to support a population of large cats. But the Asiatic lion was unable to expand further. For here, the king of the jungle is another, even larger cat. The tiger. In the jungles of India, the Bengal tiger is a vital link in the food chain. It needs an enormous territory in order to get enough food, and such expanses are increasingly rare in modern-day India. An adult female can eat up to 2,100 kilos of meat a year, and if during this time she has 2 cubs, this amount arises to 3,100 kilos, which means she must hunt down between 40 and 70 animals. Recent studies have shown that the disappearance of natural prey was the main reason the Caspian, Bali and Java tigers became extinct, 3 of the 8 subspecies of tiger which still existed at the start of the 20th century. So the population of herbivores is key to the survival of the tigers. The diet of a tiger is very varied. They can eat anything from amphibians and reptiles to small birds and animals. But given their size and weight, the large herbivores make up most of their diet. The gores are an excellent source of food for the tiger. An adult male can be up to 2 meters high and weigh over 1,000 kilos. But this enormous amount of meat is no easy prey. Killing an adult specimen of these wild bovines is too daunting a task, even for a tiger. Unless they are driven by starvation, they will only attack the calves and the sick or injured members of the group. Despite the excellent camouflage of their stripes, the tigers are mediocre hunters. On average, only 1 in 12 attempts is successful, and that means an enormous amount of wasted energy. This means they prefer large prey, and the most numerous. The one they most often attack is the chital. These spotted deer are very prolific. The females give birth to 1 fawn every 6 months, and if conditions are good, the population of chitals grows rapidly. In fact, if there were no predators, they would soon devour all the pasture, leaving none for the other herbivores of the ecosystem. If you are the carnivore's favorite meal, you can never be too cautious. The chitals are naturally very shy, nervous creatures, and for greater safety, they have formed an alliance with another animal of the jungle, the langurs. This alliance has proven of great benefit to the chitals. Not only do the langurs help protect them, they also unintentionally provide food. When these monkeys eat, they act like real gourmets. In the jungle, they have an almost endless supply of food, and so they take the fruit and leaves, eat the best part, and throw the rest away. For the chitals, this is manna from heaven. But the alliance goes much further than this. The deer know that when the langurs are nearby, they provide an early warning system. When the monkeys come down to the ground to eat, they always post a lookout high up in the branches. If a predator approaches, it can easily be seen, and immediately the alarm is raised. The warning comes so early that the chitals move off at quite a leisurely pace. And the hunter does not even bother to follow them. He realizes he has been discovered and knows there is nothing he can do against herbivores who have been warned of his presence. Despite this initial failure, the tiger does not give up. Camouflaged among the high grass, he approaches the pools within his territory where he knows herbivores are forced to come to satisfy their thirst. Here, everyone is on the alert. But hidden in the grass, the tiger is invisible. Moving not a muscle, he lies in wait until an unsuspecting sambar comes sufficiently close. And then he attacks. If we consider the number of times tigers are unsuccessful in the hunt and the amount of meat they need, it is easy to imagine the large numbers of herbivores that must live within their territory. This means vast extensions of fertile land on which chitals, sambas and gores can feed. And in modern India, overpopulated and desperately poor, that is a rare luxury. The Indian tiger shares the country with over 1 billion people. The immense majority barely scrape a living and in one way or another depend on the natural resources around them. Bad land management and lack of knowledge of even the most basic agricultural techniques mean that the land stolen from the jungle produces just 1 or 2 harvests before the soil is carried away by the monsoon rains. But millions of hungry families need new resources, and the jungles in which the tigers live are still the only alternative. So even those small areas which are their final refuge are being progressively destroyed. This situation has created a historical paradox. The age-old enemies of the tiger have in time turned out to be his most valuable allies. The Maharajas of times past owned vast areas in which to hunt. Among the thick vegetation and the splendor of their palaces, the Hindu nobles and the English aristocracy and rulers met to set out on their spectacular hunts to claim the most sought-after trophy in Asia. This slaughter, which continued until the 1970s, virtually wiped out the entire tiger population. In 1870, there were still around 100,000 tigers in India. By 1934, this had been reduced to half that number, and in 1972, there were just 1,800 left. But these large private estates, which only the most privileged could enter, preserved their jungles, so that today they are islands of green in a sea of erosion. And the formal royal hunting grounds have become some of the best natural parks and reserves in India. The palace of Sariska, the former residence of the last Maharaja of Valois, is today a center of ecotourism. The old hunting grounds have become the Sariska National Park, and visiting guests can relive the spirit of colonial India, the sight of tigers in their natural surroundings. Inside the palace, the trophies are still conserved of those magnificent hunts and are still on display, a souvenir from a time when the threat of extinction was only just beginning to become a reality.
However, now a new phenomenon has begun. The tiger is killed not for its skin but for its bones, because of the belief in the Chinese system of medicine that tiger bones have some kind of an aphrodisiacal quality. This is an old belief, because the tiger is a very virile and a very strong animal. So tiger bones are supposed to make you very strong and virile. Now, today what is happening is, tigers are still being poached. The skins are allowed to rot. There is a big trade in tiger bones and tiger parts. Now, this is a very disturbing thing, because first of all, as I said earlier, the first threat to the tiger was the egos of the British and the Maharajas, who thought that it was a big deal to kill as many tigers as possible. The second threat to the tiger became the vanity of women, because they wanted to wear tiger skins. And the third threat now seems to come from the insecurity of men, because they seem to feel that they need aphrodisiacs and they need tiger bones to help them perform better. So it is unfortunate that the tiger gets clobbered, whatever happens.
At the end of the 1980s, the tiger virtually disappeared from southern China. The market in traditional medicines was left without one of its most important raw materials, and attention was turned to their neighboring country, which had begun to recover its tiger population, thanks to the Tiger Project, a strict conservation program. As a result, a new commercial route was opened up, though this time by poachers and smugglers.
The main use for tiger parts are they're killed in India, and then the bones are smuggled across the border, either from India into Nepal and then into China, or directly from India into China. And usually they go as whole bones. And in China they're processed. They grind up the bones and make them into different medicines. They're used by the Chinese community mainly, a lot of Japanese as well, for lots and lots of ailments. Rheumatism is a major one, a general tonic. Some parts are used as an aphrodisiac, and there are many, many different things that it's used for. And there is, I think it's something, horrifying, like 1 million potential users of tiger bone medicine.
The demand from countries such as China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, as well as immigrant communities in the United States, Canada, or Europe, is so great that experts fear for the future of all tigers in the wild. It is calculated that in India, at least one tiger dies every day at the hands of poachers. If this continues in from 5 to 10 years, not a single one of these striped cats will be left in the country. Today, India accounts for over half of all the tigers living in the wild. Countries like Japan or China covet this natural treasure, and it would seem to matter very little to them that this is a limited resource which, if it were to disappear, would do so forever. After all, they have already destroyed more than one subspecies of this beautiful cat. At the start of the century, tigers inhabited a vast territory. 8 species divided up the continent of Asia. But as a result of 100 years of hunting and deforestation, tigers have disappeared from Bali, the Caspian, and Java, and there are so few Chinese tigers left that it seems impossible for the population ever to recover. Now, India has become the world's tiger reserve, just as it had become the reserve of the legendary Asiatic lion. Dawn is rising in the Gir National Park, and with the first rays of sunlight, the Maldari villages stir to life. The Maldari are a cattle-rearing people of the Indian region of Gujarat in the west of the country. Their herds of buffaloes and dromedaries provide them with everything they need: their basic food, the energy for heating in the form of dried manure, and a little money which they exchange for basic necessities. Despite their precarious existence, they are happy to share their territory with the second greatest predator of India, the Asiatic lion. This is the lion that was hunted by Assurbanipal, the Assyrian king immortalized in the stone carvings of Nineveh. Once it could be found throughout Asia, but today they live exclusively within the 1,400 square kilometers of the park and have only managed to survive thanks to the agreement that has been reached with the Maldaris. The Maldari cattle compete with the wild herbivores of the ecosystem devouring the pasture. This reduces the potential prey for the lions, and so any Maldares who want to graze their buffaloes inside the park have to pay a tax in the form of meat for the lions. Lions do not often kill the buffalo. In the park, there are many natural prey, and, as with the tigers, their favorite victims are the cheetahs. But in the end, it has been this coexistence with the local human population which has made it possible to save the lion. If the government and the local population took the trouble to organize a campaign to save the lion, it was in part because at that time it was the national animal of India. So, once the survival of the lion had been assured, attention was turned to the plight of the tiger, and Dr. Karan Singh asked the then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, to consider a daring and original idea.
I discovered that the national animal of India was the lion at that time. Now, as you know, our national symbol has the 4 lions. There's a marvelous column from Ashoka's time showing the lions, which is why the lion was probably adopted as a national animal. However, it struck me that lions in India are found only in one state, in Gujarat, and there are only about a couple of hundred lions, whereas the tiger was at that time and still is widely dispersed throughout India, from the north to the south and from the east to the west. So I suggested, at my initiative, that we should change the national animal of India from the lion to the tiger. And that really set in motion this whole process of the tiger project. Because once we adopted the tiger as our national animal, then of course the question arose with regard to tiger conservation. And I discussed the matter with Madam Gandhi, and she was very supportive. She said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "I think we should have a special project to save the tigers from extinction."
Thus, the Tiger Project was born, the most ambitious project ever undertaken anywhere in the world to try to save a species of animal. The success of this campaign depends not only on the protection of the tiger, but also its habitat and the animals it feeds on. In this way, an emblematic animal, the insignia of the nation, made it possible to save entire ecosystems. The reserves set up for this purpose produced immediate results. Animals like the Barasinga, a deer native to central India, were saved on the very edge of extinction, and today their numbers are stable in the Kanha National Park, probably the best place in the world to see tigers in the wild. In order that the reserves should not be merely isolated islands, natural corridors were also created, stretches of jungle linking the protected areas. As a result, the different populations of tigers could mix and interbreed. The tiger is a solitary and therefore territorial animal. If hunting is plentiful, an adult male can occupy an area of between 50 and 100 square kilometers, in which there may be from 3 to 5 females. No other male will be allowed to enter, and so there can be absolutely no doubt that this is his domain. The dominant tiger clearly marks the edges of his territory. With their powerful claws, they scar the tree trunks, visual signals. But in the jungle, communication is most effective by sound and smell. While the claw marks are only visible if we look at the tree trunk, the urine of the male and his body smell can be perceived over a much wider area. To reinforce the message, the tiger also uses its feces as a kind of olfactory marker to warn off intruders. In the conservation of the tiger, it is vital that there should be genetic mixing among the different populations to avoid inbreeding, and hence the importance of the corridors of jungle. In this way, the Tiger Project has revitalized the population of the great striped cat, making it possible for more of them to breed. Female tigers are receptive for just a few days. The territorial male locates them thanks to his sense of smell and, for a week or two, pursues the female until she is ready to mate. Then they will follow from 2 to 5 exhausting days, on each one of which they will copulate up to 50 times. The Tiger Project had immediate repercussions on the tiger population. The seemingly irreversible drop in numbers was halted and in just 5 years began to rise again. And even more importantly, the 33,000 square kilometers of nature reserves of the Tiger Project guarantee the conservation of the ecosystems in which the tiger lives.
It isn't only the tiger you safeguard, because once you safeguard the tiger, it means you have to safeguard the ecosystem which supports the tiger. And at one stage, it was the most successful conservation project in the world, because the tigers had been hunted to the verge of extinction. Our estimate was that in the year 1900, there must have been about 50,000 tigers in India. When we started Project Tiger in the early 70s, there were hardly 2,500 or 3,000 tigers left.
The project works on a number of different fronts. Not only was it necessary to set up reserves, but also to guarantee their conservation, and teams were trained to guard them and prevent poaching. The creation of specialized patrol services helped avoid poaching and also allowed monitoring and population censuses of the different animals, most especially the tiger. But the fact that much of the jungle within the reserves is inaccessible means getting around on foot is impossible. So the guards needed a suitable vehicle. This vehicle had to be able to cope with all types of terrain, but without destroying the natural surroundings or scaring off the wildlife. It also had to guarantee the safety of the guards if they came face to face with a tiger. And the only means of transport that could meet all these requirements was the elephant. Trained elephants have become an invaluable ally in the parks and reserves of India. The mahouts, who are in charge of training and looking after them, form a lifelong relationship with the elephant. They are not only their work tool, their source of income, but over time they become virtually another member of the family. Every day, the mahouts take their elephants to the river. After years of training, the elephants become docile with their masters. But no mahout ever forgets that though tamed, they are still wild animals, 3 meters high and weighing up to 5,000 kilos. These pachyderms have a very complex social structure. Their owners scrub and scrape their skin, not so much for reasons of hygiene, but rather because it is a ritual which strengthens the bond between man and animal. In this way, the mahouts retain their authority, which must be recognized by the elephants if they are to obey their orders. And this is vitally important, as it is the elephants which transport the tourists who visit the park. The creation of reserves and parks to protect the taiga and its natural environment is by no means cheap. But precisely because they are so well conserved, the ecosystems and the animals that live there generate considerable income. And the most important source of income comes from the tourists, who are prepared to pay considerable sums for the privilege of experiencing unspoiled nature. The elephants which carry the tourists sometimes scare off the tigers, who often hide when they see them approach. But this is a minor drawback compared to the enormous benefits. As long as there are people willing to pay to see tigers in the wild, they will remain a source of income for the local people and, by extension, for the country as a whole. So these annoying visitors are, to a great extent, a guarantee for the future of the tiger. The arrival of the dry season means a time of scarcity in India. The pasture becomes parched and the suffocating heat means that even the slightest movement is an effort, more water lost through sweat. Until the first rains, the grass will not grow, and as the food available is less nutritious, all the animals have to eat greater amounts to satisfy their hunger, and that means yet another problem. Over much of the country, outside the protected areas, the vegetation cover is extremely badly deteriorated or simply does not exist. Heat and drought turn this country into a desert, and local peasants and herders see the parks as the only place to feed their cattle. As a result, the herbivores are faced with fierce competition, just at the time of year when food is at its scarcest. And still there is another, even more terrible enemy. The dry pasture and the fierce, unremitting heat are ideal conditions for the smallest flame to quickly become a roaring blaze. In the settlements around the edges of the park, where the fields have been destroyed by bad agricultural practices, the people see an opportunity to gain a little more fertile land. This is merely a temporary solution, and in the long run only serves to make the problem worse. The majority of India's population is poor, malnourished even, and so it is difficult to explain to them why the World Wildlife Fund and the Indian state itself invests millions of dollars in protecting the last surviving tigers. But saving these cats means saving an entire ecosystem, and so preventing the country from becoming one enormous desert. If that was allowed to happen, the entire population would surely be condemned to live forever in the most abject poverty. Despite the rigors of the climate, the dry season is also the mating season for many of the animals of the jungle. Chitals, sambas and barasingas test their strength in harmless combats in which injuries are rare. This is the start of the courting rituals, and the males challenge each other in order to determine who will mate with the females. Even in these clashes between rival males, the climate exerts its influence and the barasinga's movements are incongruously slow. The heat is the strongest force in the jungle, and everyone has to adapt their behavior accordingly. The pools are the one place all the animals of the ecosystem must visit. The herbivores, like these thirsty sambas, approach the water cautiously. Their raised tails are a warning sign indicating precaution and suspicion. They know that the carnivores too must come to drink sooner or later. Among the potential prey that gather at the water's edge, subtle forms of collaboration are established. They are all on the alert, all carefully watching the surrounding area. So while one animal drinks, it knows that there are dozens of vigilant eyes, and even the slightest suspicious movement immediately sets off an entire range of alarm signals. A samba warns of an approaching jackal. Though for them it is inoffensive, its warning alerts the birds around the pool, and they are all immediately on their guard. While the jackal remains close, even though it is small and inoffensive, the chitals and sambas will mark it, revealing its presence, and making it impossible for it to hunt. At the end of the dry season, a sure sign that the rains will come soon, the peafowl get ready to mate. Each peacock establishes a small territory for its courtship display alongside its competitors. So all that the females have to do is stroll around, look, and choose the one that most appeals to them. Few courtship displays are so spectacular. The movements of the feathers makes the visual stimulus even more powerful. A peacock's tail continues to grow throughout its life. The females choose the male with the greatest number of peacock eyes on its tail, as he is the most fully developed, and so the most suitable one to perpetuate his genes. The dry season is a difficult time for the tigers. Access to the interior of the jungle is easier, and the poachers can enter deeper to set their traps and poisons. Paradoxically, behind these exterminating assassins, there are generally countries which have either never been home to tigers, such as Japan or Taiwan, or have killed off all those they once had, such as China and South Korea. And what is even more incredible, while all other consumer countries have placed a ban on this trade, there is still one which quite openly allows it: Japan.
China, Japan, South Korea and Taiwan are the major consumer countries. There's also a lot of illegal tiger trade in countries like America and Canada and Australia and some parts of Europe. But those four countries are the main ones. But in 93 and 94, China, South Korea, and Taiwan banned the internal trade in tiger parts. Only Japan hasn't.
In Delhi, a demonstration organized by the Indian Wildlife Protection Society is denouncing the attitude of a country which happily flaunts the conservation measures adopted by the rest of the world.
Marches of this sort draw attention to the fact that a trade in tiger parts is still legal in one country, Japan. It is an affront to the people in range countries like India and other tiger range countries who risk their lives to protect the tiger, and the people who do undercover work in Western countries to disclose the nature of the trade.
A group of actors from Rajasthan acts out in the streets of Delhi the tragedy that is happening in their country. The Japanese market is responsible not just for the death of the tiger, it is also a major consumer of ivory. After a 10-year international ban on the ivory trade, CITES, the world watchdog for the control of endangered animals and plants, caved into pressure from Japan and allowed them to again buy tusks. But this legal market also opened the way for the poachers, and many Indian elephants are now threatened, just like the tigers. Trafficking in tiger bones has become such a profitable business that poachers sometimes simply discard the skins, which are easier to detect at border controls. And, worst of all, even when they are caught, the law is not applied, or proves powerless to do anything.
And even people who are criminals who were not involved in this trade have now, because it's become so profitable, have now gone into this trade. And it's a bailable offence. If you're in drugs, you don't, and you're caught, you don't get bail. If you're caught with tiger bones, you can get bail. And this is something we're fighting through the system, but so far have not succeeded.
In 1984, with the assassination of Indira Gandhi, Indian wildlife lost its greatest defender. The Tiger Project, which had become the most successful conservation project in the world, has gradually lost impetus since then. Little by little, power has been transferred to local governments, and these, needing the votes of a population living in poverty, have allowed the natural corridors to be turned over to agriculture, and the forests at the edge of the parks to be burnt and cut down. The trade in bones and the massive loss of its natural habitat have, once more, brought the tiger to the very edge of extinction.
So today, the situation again is not a happy one. Our population has grown, the pressure on the environment has grown, there's increasing deforestation, desertification, and the tigers really are being squeezed into smaller and smaller areas.
Until there is political stability in India, there will always be a question mark for the future of the tiger here.
The false belief in the medicinal and aphrodisiac properties of tiger bones is wiping out the last specimens of the largest cat on Earth. Its natural habitat is being destroyed at an increasingly rapid rate, and the problem is becoming worse. But India now seems, at last, to be waking up to the reality of the situation. The tigers and their environment have the potential to generate enormous income from tourism, which could serve to alleviate poverty. And the entire world, especially the Indians, are determined to prevent a few unscrupulous countries from depriving us of this beautiful animal which is part of the natural heritage of all humanity. In February 2000, 2 months after completing this documentary and thanks to pressure from governments all around the world and groups like the WPSI, Japan placed a ban on the sale of products from tigers which did not have the necessary government documentation certifying they had been imported before 1980, the year in which Japan became a signatory member of CITES. Conservationists have welcomed this ban, but knowing how easy it is to falsify this type of document, are continuing to apply pressure in order to achieve a total ban, which the international community urgently demands. A small battle has been won, but the war still continues.